Hi everyone, I'm Katie Teitler, Senior Analyst with Tag Cyber, and I'm here today with Darren Mar-Elia, VP of Products at Semperis. Darren, thanks for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks, Katie. It's good to be here.
Awesome, let's jump right in. So Active Directory is a main focus for Semperis, and it's a critical enterprise service. So managing Active Directory has gone from being a quagmire for IT teams for many years, but more recently, security teams have had greater oversight for its use and obviously the security of AD, because it can be an attacker's paradise. It holds a plethora of identity and access information. And if it's exploited, it can cause massive disruption, a major breach, access to different systems, files, information, and possibly even legal or regulatory consequences, right? So this is a pretty big and important system.
It is the keys to the kingdom, as we say.
It's also about a 20-year-old technology.
Yes, it is.
So my first question to you is, what factors in a cloud-first, mobile device anywhere, remote work environment, we can see we're both remote here, what factors make AD especially challenging to secure?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think actually I've been involved with AD since, well, before it shipped, so over 20 years, first as an enterprise IT architect, and then more recently as a vendor. And I think what's happened is that AD has simultaneously gone from being this kind of sleepy internal system to being the sort of backbone for the move to the cloud. And in a lot of organizations, through technologies like SAML Federation, are using AD to authenticate and authorize access to cloud applications today. At the same time, you have, as is the case in the current pandemic, you have workers accessing corporate data from all over, not just within the four walls of the organization anymore. The perimeter has really dissolved. I think that's been going on for a while, but it's sort of been accelerated recently. And all of that has kind of shown up the weaknesses of AD. AD was fine when the folks that were accessing it were within the four walls of the organization, behind the firewalls, in general, sort of protected. But now that you have people accessing applications and data from literally anywhere, and frankly, the typical attack in an organization, the typical ransomware or malware attack, usually starts by somebody clicking on something in email and launching some kind of malware. And once that malware is in the environment, it just wreaks havoc within the environment. And AD is a prime target for a lot of attackers because it does have the keys to the kingdom. It has usernames, passwords, access rights to pretty much everything in the organization. So I think all of that has conspired to make AD a prime target these days for attackers that are looking around to escalate privilege and get access to corporate data within an environment.
Yeah, it's true. There's so much rich data in AD that it's this bright, shiny object. And that's why it's so attractive to attackers, but it's kind of fundamental for so many companies.
It really is.
And it takes all of this information, it aggregates it in one place. But you touched on something with authorization and authentication that I want to go back to a little bit, because identity's been called the new perimeter. And obviously so much of that information is contained within AD. So if we're looking at security and what we need to do now, again, in a cloud-first, mobile, remote work environment, do you agree that identity is the quote-unquote new perimeter? Why or why not? What would be your argument?
Yeah.
For, against, or it depends?
Yeah, I think I mean I've heard that term before. I've heard terms like identity is the control plane, identity is the new perimeter, and I think that's true. And the reason is that because you now have workers coming from pretty much anywhere, that the old perimeter was the corporate network, the firewalled, segmented corporate network. The only thing you can hang your hat on from a control perspective is the identity of the user and the ability of the user to prove their identity. And that's really all you have. If I'm sitting in a Starbucks, you certainly don't trust the network I'm on. You may not even trust the machine I'm on, but you can trust me telling you who I am because I have something unique about me, whether it's a password or a YubiKey or something like that that's identifying me. That identity is the thing that I can, as an IT person or as an InfoSec person, it's the thing that I can count on. So if that identity is compromised, then we have no perimeter. It's really the Wild West. And so I do agree that identity systems like Active Directory now are sort of the last thing we can count on in a world where there is no perimeter really.
How does that all fit into the zero trust argument, right? Because you can't really count on somebody saying they are who they are. You have to
Right.
prove it. You have to
You do.
provide some sort of additional verification.
You do. And I think that's what's driving a lot of zero trust is a little bit misleading of a term, I think, because you do have to trust something. And I think what it does is it puts the onus on the folks that are maintaining these systems to try to build trustworthy paths to access, whether it's multi-factor, whether it's doing a combination of factors to try to guarantee that you are who you are. There's a lot of capabilities now around being able to detect suspicious logins because I logged in from San Francisco, today at 12, and at 1 o'clock I'm logging in from Poland. Well, that's probably not possible. So those are the kinds of additional factors that I can use to sort of guarantee that I am who I say I am. But I think it's a battle to continually find ways of sort of guaranteeing identity within this world. I mean, I think that is the challenge for sure.
Well, this is a nice pivot into Semperis. So talk to me about some of the more recent attacks targeting AD, like Rayak, Maze.
Right.
How would Semperis help block or stop propagation of an attack?
Right. Yeah. So I think we see a similar pattern with a lot of these attacks, and I think it was very well documented in a number of different media around the Maersk attack, the NotPetya attack to Maersk. But more recently, I think the malware like Maze or Ryuk have taken a similar approach. They get into the network usually through some kind of phishing attack. I think it's interesting actually that the path into a network is certainly not often finding a vulnerability in the operating system, although that still happens for sure, and we see that pretty much every month. But the more common path is a weakness in user behavior, if you will, to get malware into the environment. And once it gets into the environment, it takes advantage of sort of well-established tooling out there for attackers. Some of that tooling is used by legitimate pen testers to find weaknesses in the environment, but it's targeting Active Directory as a means to finding paths to privileged escalation and more interesting targets for data exfiltration or ultimately for destruction using ransomware or malware or some kind of wiperware. So what we try to do is help in the first phase. We help customers to identify weaknesses in their Active Directory security configuration. So there are very well documented paths to privilege escalation using Active Directory. Active Directory was never designed to be interrogated to show paths to attack. It was designed to give information to legitimate users but all that information is there for the having. And the default implementation of Active Directory grants a legitimate user read access to everything, and that's the way most ADs are deployed. So using that information, people can find out who's in privileged groups, what machines they've logged into, and then be able to hop around the environment to find additional targets and to escalate privilege. And that's what happens in a lot of these attacks. They find interesting machines with credentials on them. They use those credentials to hop to different machines. And then eventually they're able to use the infrastructure against itself to distribute malware. We've seen that in a lot of situations, using Active Directory and its group policy capabilities to actually distribute the malware. So what we do with Semperis is we try to show those weaknesses in your Active Directory to help you address them before they become the victim of some kind of attack. We also show you suspicious changes that are happening within the environment. So if there is somebody in the environment doing things to try to escalate their privileges or add themselves to groups they shouldn't be, we can identify that and even auto-remediate it if you have rules for when and who should be added to those privileged groups.
Walk us through deployment of Semperis a little bit. What does it look like? Who needs to be involved? What changes need to be made? How quickly can a company get it up and running?
Yep. Yeah. So, I've spent 20 plus years in IT, and that was always the main challenge whenever we brought in a vendor is how easy is the solution to integrate into your culture, so to speak. And so one of the things that I've been pleasantly surprised at since coming to Semperis and have strove to maintain as head of product is to really make the products easy to use, easy to deploy. In general, you can get up and running with our solutions in a couple of hours and have visibility into AD almost immediately. We have a fairly rich role-based access control model, so you can grant access to the information for the users that need it without granting access to everything, unlike AD. So you can essentially deploy the solution, start running these tests against your environment to find out about your security posture really within a couple of hours. And we have, the solution that I've just described is really focused on before the attack and during the attack. We have a disaster recovery solution that is critical for everyone to have some kind of disaster recovery solution for AD in place. And that solution is even easier to start deploying and getting your Active Directory backed up. So I think one of our benefits is that the tools are simple to use, simple to install, and really easy to get going with quickly.
That's great. I think in today's world, it's becoming almost a must-have for solutions not to be this big onerous process to take months to get up and running. I mean, there's still, there are still things that require that, but I think as we're becoming more cloud first, vendors who aren't focused on that ease of deployment, ease of integration, ease of operation and management are going to lose out to those who can be more agile for their customers.
I totally agree. And we have, plenty of our customers live in that hybrid world with resources in the cloud and resources on-prem. And we have a number of customers that have deployed our solutions in their cloud infrastructure to be able to reach down into their on-prem or reach into their cloud infrastructure to protect AD. So we're fairly agnostic to where the product lives. As long as we can get access to AD, we're good.
So a few minutes ago, you touched on disaster recovery, which is incredibly important. Obviously, nobody wants a disaster, but as we've all seen in the last few months, got to prepare for one. Let's hope it never happens. Your company Collateral emphasizes resiliency quite a bit. And in the cybersecurity market, we've gotten used to the silver bullet approach from vendors. Do this, do that, you'll be completely protected, we'll drive down your risk. But Semperis doesn't take that approach and openly addresses the fact that some attacks, regardless of deployed controls, will get through. Why do you take that stance? And how do your products help with resiliency?
Right. That's a great question. I mentioned that we have two products, Directory Services Protector, which is focused on before and during the attack, and then Active Directory Forest Recovery, which is focused on after the attack. Microsoft has this term that they've been using for a number of years called assume breach. And I think that realistically, we know that breaches are going to happen, that no software is perfect, that the attackers are always looking to get the upper hand. And so we have to assume that even though we're going to try hard to do everything possible, if some new operating system vulnerability comes around, some new 0-day that gets exploited, the attackers may get in and they may do damage. So how do we protect against that? How do we remain resilient against that? The challenge with Active Directory as a platform is that it's relatively complex to recover if you're just taking a bunch of backups and hoping for the best. We've seen this time and again and published accounts from these kind of high-profile ransomware attacks where it's literally taken days or weeks to recover Active Directory. And a lot of that has to do with the number of steps that you have to go through. Starting with a backup on one or two servers in your domain is fine, but getting back to a fully functioning production environment is a different matter altogether. And so what we've tried to do is make that process as automated and as simple as possible. In fact, in many cases, we've had really large environments be able to show that they can recover their Active Directory in literally several hours instead of days or weeks. And I'm talking about some of the largest organizations in the world from an Active Directory perspective. So that's that resilience is really around, yes, detect attacks that are happening. Yes, show me what my weaknesses are. But in the worst case scenario, you have to have a plan B, and that plan B is to recover as quickly as possible. And that's what we're focused on.
That sounds good. I think everybody watching and listening today can relate to that. It hit home pretty quickly. So for those at home, if you're watching, listening, and want to learn more about what Semperis does, please give them a shout. They've been a great partner to us over the years. Darren, thank you so much for spending the time with me here today. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yep, thanks so much. Take care.